Hello, my dear friends. In preparing a drasha, I always try to find something that's relevant to our own lives, and I'd like to share with you today a thought that I think has great application. The Chumash tells the whole story of how Yaakov received the brachos from Yitzchak. Yitzchak loved Esav, but Rivka loved Yaakov, and Rivka instructed Yaakov that he should appear before his father and impersonate Esav. Yaakov was blind, and Yitzchak and Esav were twins, so their voices were the same. Yaakov would appear before Yitzchak and tell Yitzchak that he is his son. Anochi Esav b'chorecha. I'm your bechor. I am Esav, and in that way he would secure the bracha from Yitzchak. And indeed, that's what Yitzchak did. He gave Yaakov the bracha b'yitin l'cha elokim yital shamayim, because he thought that this was Esav that appeared before him. So the Chumash says, first, one big issue is how is it possible that Yaakov engaged in such a subterfuge, and why did he listen to his mother, and why did Rivka, who's one of the most, why did she encourage Yaakov to deceive his father in that way? And there are many different approaches. The most well-known is that of the Ramban. The Ramban says that Rivka, before Yaakov and Esav were born, she went, the beginning of the Parshas, she went to seek out guidance from a Navi to understand it was a tumultuous pregnancy, and she wanted to understand what was taking place. And she appeared before a prophet who told her that Shnei Goyim bevitnech, there are two nations that are going to emerge from your womb, V'Rabbi Avot Tzara, and the younger one the older one will serve the needs of the younger one. So she knew that Esav was supposed to be secondary to and submissive to Yaakov, and therefore she felt it was important for Yaakov to receive the brachos, and the only way that could happen is if Yitzchak would think that Yaakov was Esav. That's the Rambans Explanation. It needs a lot of the many. It still does. It leaves many questions unanswered, but I'm going to leave that for a separate time. What struck me this morning is the Chumash says that Yaakov said to his mother that Ulayim Musheni Avi, maybe my father will touch me, even though our voices are the same. But Yaakov was his skin was plain, whereas Esav was hairy, Yisayar, and he'll be able to tell by feeling me, touching me. He'll put his hand on my shoulder. He'll know right away that I'm not Esav, that I'm Yaakov. So Rivka's advice was she gave him the bigdei hachamudos, the precious garments that Esav had, and she said, you wear those, and then this way, if Yaakov puts his hand on you, he'll feel these garments and he won't know that you are not Esav. Where did these garments come from? These bigdei hachamudos. So Rashi says the word chamud, in one of the explanations, Rashi says it means that it was stolen, like or it was coveted. Losachmod is you should not covet. So Esav coveted these garments from whom? From Nimrod. Nimrod wore these were Nimrod's garments, and Esav stole the garments from Nimrod. It was Nimrod's coat, and Esav stole it from Nimrod. Now, who was Nimrod? The name Nimrod has in it the word merid, which means to a rebellion. And the Chumash and Rashi explain in the end of Parshas Noach that Nimrod was Gibor Tzayid. He was a great warrior, and Gibor Tzayid Lifnei Hashem, but he was a warrior before Hashem. He did battle with Hashem. He fought with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no less than fighting me with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he captured people in the sense that he convinced people to be morid against Hashem, to rebel against the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So not only did he battle Hashem, but he had an entire following of people that were battling against Hashem. And Rashi says that Nimrod typifies a person who's makir baro or morid bo. He recognized, he didn't deny that God exists, but he recognized God's existence, but he was going to rebel, or he did rebel against the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So that's the kind of person that Nimrod was. So Esav appreciated that. Esav was a hunter, and he also was engaged in shikri tzayid b'fiv. He would deceive people. So therefore, he coveted those garments of Nimrod. Nimrod was his mentor, so to speak. So he stole those garments from Nimrod, and it was those garments that Yaakov had to put on in order to appear before Yitzchak. So what troubled me is that, albeit the explanation of the Ramban and others is that there was an element of divine providence, that God wanted things to unfold the way they did, but then we're entitled to ask, why did God want, or worked it out in such a way that Yaakov would have to wear the garments of Nimrod? I can imagine the psychological torment that Yaakov had to undergo to wear those garments of Nimrod. Imagine, for example, if if somebody had the uniform of Hitler, and they Yamach Shemo v'Zichro, and they forced you to wear Hitler's uniform. That would be horrific. That you would have to wear his garments, and you would have at least to some extent, the appearance of Hitler. Nimrod was chief atheist. Well, he wasn't an atheist. He was apikoros. He believed in God. He rebelled against God, and he had a whole entourage or following, a group of people that followed in his footsteps to rebel against God. Yaakov was the antithesis of that. Yaakov was Ishtam Yoshev Olim. He was devoted. He sat and learned in yeshiva all day. Why did God design things in such a way that of all the garments in the world that Yaakov would have to wear, would have to wear the garments of Nimrod, who was who was the one that rebelled against the Kadosh Baruch Hu? That's the question I wanted to pose. So I had the following thought. There's a famous story about the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon, at one point in time, decided he wanted to hear Musar. He wanted to improve his character, so he invited the Dubna Maggid, who was the great Maggid from Dubna, to come before him and to give him Musar. So at first the Dubna Maggid was extremely reluctant. How can I give Musar to the Vilna Gaon? He was such a great tzaddik and such a tremendous Talmud Chacham. But finally, the Vilna Gaon said, you have to give me Musar. I want to improve myself. So the Dubna Maggid, reportedly, supposedly, he said to the Vilna Gaon, you know, you're a tremendous Talmud Chacham and you're a great tzaddik. But he says, you're doing that in your Beis Medrash in Vilna. He says, that's no kunz. The word kunz means like a trick. It's not a big deal. So you're a Vilna Gaon and locked up in the Beis Medrash in hibernation. So it's not such a big deal to be a Vilna Gaon. Go out to the market and engage with the people. And then there's issues with if you're involved in business, there's nisyonos, tests of integrity and honesty. And the people are coarse and they use foul language and vulgarities, and there's Lashon Hara. Let's see you be in that environment and still remain the Vilna Gaon. There's no kunz to be the Vilna Gaon in the Beis Medrash. So supposedly the Vilna Gaon responded. He says, yes, it's true. It's no kunz. But he says, but I'm not a kunstmacher. A kunstmacher is play on the words, but it means a magician. The word kunz means to do a trick. So he says, I'm not a kunstmacher. I'm not somebody who could do tricks. You're right. It's not a big kunz to do it in the Beis Medrash. That I can manage, but to go out of the marketplace and be a Vilna Gaon, that would be a great kunz. And I'm not a kunstmacher. I'm unable to do so. It's questionable whether that is an apocryphal story or really happened. I did a little bit of research earlier today, and I saw there's some discussion. The story was not recorded by one of the biographers of the Vilna Gaon at the time that he lived or shortly thereafter. So maybe the story happened, maybe it did not. Either way, everybody knows the story. It's a famous story, and the message of the story is that it's one thing to be a tzaddik when you're cloistered in the Beis Medrash. It's another thing. It's far more difficult to be a tzaddik when you go to the outside world. So I would pose the following question, which is similar to the question that I asked about Yaakov having to wear Nimrod's garments, and that is, why indeed did God create the world in such a way that we're forced to be involved in the secular environment, and we're exposed to people who are not refined, and people we live in a world where the culture of society is so far removed from things and values that we can consider to be holy and dear to us, and we're forced to be engaged in that culture. People sometimes for business purposes, they have to go to, I got all these shilos this time of the year. This year it probably won't happen, but every year people have to go to New Year parties, and they want to know if that's okay. And the things that the type of environment that takes place at a New Year party is not where a nice religious man or woman should spend their New Year's. Why did God arrange it that we have to be thrust into an environment? And even our business dealings, wouldn't we be better off if we could all stay in a closed environment in the ghetto like it used to be? The Jewish community was in a ghetto. Now we're with total freedom, and we interact with everybody. There are many very wonderful and nice people, Jewish and non-Jewish, who we interact with. But there are many people who are coarse, and they're dishonest, and they're immoral and unethical. Why are we, just like I question, why did Yaakov have to wear the garments of Nimrod? Why do we have to wear the garments of the secular society? Why are we forced to be in that position? And my thinking was that the reason is because the Ribbono Shel Olam created the world that way. There is the secular world, and there's the spiritual world, and God created both together. And what He wanted is that the Jew should be able to take the values of the spiritual world and continue to live with those values, even the world of secularity, and by doing so to elevate the secular world, to be able to infuse the secular world with the values that a Jew lives by. And that's the kunst that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to accomplish. He doesn't want us to be hermits. Judaism doesn't believe in hermitage. We don't go up on a mountain someplace in a monastery and stay there our whole life. We have to be engaged with people. We're not supposed to isolate ourselves. As I say, I don't know if the story about the Vilna Gaon was a real story. I'm sure the Vilna Gaon was involved with people. So that God did not create a world where we should live our own lives in isolation. On the contrary, He wanted us to be involved. He wanted us to be exposed to values that are contrary to our own. Of course, to the extent that we could avoid them, we should, and we don't have to bring them into our homes, and we have to try to protect our children as much as possible. But that is part of the challenge of life, is that a Jew should live in the same world as everybody else lives, and in that world to elevate it to a higher order. And that was what the test of Yaakov was, to see if he's wearing the garments of Nimrod. They say that the clothing makes the man. Just by wearing Nimrod's garments, it should have had an enormous impact on Yaakov, or it should have had a corrupting impact, influence on Yaakov, that he's now wearing the garments of Nimrod, who was a person who rebelled against the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's a mighty warrior. He's wearing the garments of a mighty warrior. But what does the Chumash say? That when he appeared before his father Yitzchak says, "Hakol kol Yaakov yadayim yadei Esav." The essence of Yaakov is his call. Esav is his hands. Esav, everything is external for Esav, and Esav is constantly in conquest and fighting and battling and involved in wars. That's the yadayim of Esav. That's the hands of Esav. But Yaakov is a person of pnimius, of essence, of inner values, and the call Yaakov was not corrupted one iota when he stood before Yitzchak wearing the garments of Esav. It had no impact on him. It reminds me when I was a kid, one of my favorite television shows was Superman. So Superman was, in everyday life, he was Clark Kent, a mild-mannered reporter. But when he needed to have superpowers, he would go into a telephone booth. They used to have them in those days. Some of you may not even know what a telephone booth is. And he would put on the garments of Superman, and then all of a sudden he would have those superpowers. The uniform changed him. So the test for Yaakov was to see if wearing the garments of Nimrod, would that challenge Yaakov? Would that redefine Yaakov? Would that have a corrupting influence on Yaakov? And Yaakov rose to the occasion. That the Vilna Gaon said, "I'm not a kunstmacher," but perhaps he said that. But yet that was exactly the test of Yaakov, to see if he could. It wasn't the kunst that he was Yoshev Olim. He sat in the tent all day learning and studying yeshiva, and he was in yeshiva Shem Ve'ever. He was a big masmid, sitting learning yeshiva. What God wanted to see, what's going to happen to Yaakov when he has to be engaged in the external world, and he can't stay forever in the four walls of the yeshiva. What's going to happen when he has to? In other words, has tremendous symbolic significance. He has to take the worst of the external world, the garments of Nimrod, who rebelled against the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he had a whole following of people rebelling. He had to put those on, and the test was, is he still going to be Yaakov? And he rose to the occasion in such a magnificent way, because even wearing the garments of Esav, Hakol Kol Yaakov, the inner voice of Yaakov remained crystal clear. And in fact, the Chumash says that when Yaakov came before Yitzchak, it says Vayarach esreach begadav. He smelled the fragrance of his garments. And Rashi says that he brought in with him the reich Gan Eden, the fragrance of Gan Eden, which means to say that even the garments of Nimrod, which were so polluted and so corrupted, and that Nimrod had worn when he was engaged in so much immoral activity, when Yaakov wore Nimrod's garments, they had the fragrance of Gan Eden. And that's so remarkable that he was able to take those garments, and wearing them, he still was a Kol Kol Yaakov, and he entered into before Yitzchak with the fragrance of Gan Eden that accompanied him. And he was transformed the secular into the spiritual, where he transformed the immoral into a world of kedusha. And I think that has tremendous relevancy to us, as I said before, because we are constantly in that position where we have to wear the big day Nimrod. We have to rub shoulders with people that their value system is not the same as our value system, and there's so much going on in the world, and it's so hard to not get drawn in. The whole world of politics is such a overwhelming and imposing part of our lives, and there's so much deception and lack of integrity in the world of politics, and here you have the politicians. Every day there's something else going on, and they're battling with each other, and it affects all of us. So we read the papers, or we read on on our smartphones every morning. You catch the news, and it's hard to. Here you are wearing the garments of Nimrod, so to speak. You're engaged in it, and it's hard not to be pulled in the direction pulled away from the values of the Torah. And the challenge is that even in those times we have to know what's going on in the secular world. I'm not recommending that we should hide in an underground bunker. We have to know what is going on. We have to be engaged in the world. We have to be deal with people. We can't isolate ourselves. But the challenge is, while we're wearing the garments of Nimrod, but we still have to retain Hakol Kol Yaakov, and that the fragrance of Gan Eden should be, our mitzvah should be of such purity and quality that even when we're in that environment, we should be making a Kiddush Hashem, and people should see, wow, look at the integrity of a Jew. Look how the Jew, his language is different, his conduct is different, his sense of morality and values are superlative. And we should take the fragrance of Gan Eden with us, even as we wear the garments of Nimrod, or the garments of Esav. And it's a difficult challenge. The Vilna Gaon said, you have to be a kunstmacher to do that. You have to be a magician. He didn't want to. He was afraid that he can't be a kunstmacher. Again, I don't know if he really said that, but in any event, it's a great challenge for us, and I hope that we will all be successful, and indeed we will have a enormous impact on, and not only on our own small bubble of a world, but we should have on the external world. We should also have tremendous influence, and the Kol Yaakov should always be loud and clear.